Okay, Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ira Azhari. I'm the Senior Manager for the Democracy and Governance Unit at IDEAS. I apologize for some technical difficulties earlier. I hope now everyone is in Zoom and can also view our webinar live on Facebook. Apologize, so we needed to start a bit late because of the technical difficulties. Thank you very much for joining us on this Friday afternoon for our online discussion that is the culmination of our 2-year project to promote national unity and interracial harmony in Malaysia. Before we begin our discussion today, I have a gentle reminder regarding IDEAS policy on sexual exploitation and abuse. At IDEAS, we are committed to provide a safe environment for all parties, both internal and external, to work together. IDEAS has a policy of zero tolerance towards sexual exploitation and abuse. Everyone here today is responsible for making this event a safe space for public discourse. There are a few changes to our agenda today. Unfortunately, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, Datuk Seri Saifuddin Abdullah, is unable to join us for the keynote speech, and one of our panelists, Ms. Firdaus Husni, is also unable to join us. In today's forum, IDEAS will launch our graphic handbook called Tanpa Perkauman, The Road to a Discrimination-Free Malaysia, which we produced in collaboration with our partner Imagine Malaysia. This handbook is available to download on the IDEAS website in both PM and English. We will be sharing the link with all of you in the chat box and also on Facebook. So to kick things off today, I would first like to invite the Chief Executive Officer of IDEAS, Trisha Yeo, to give her welcoming remarks. Go ahead, Trisha.
Thank you so much, Ira. Very good afternoon to all of you here. Firstly, our deepest apologies for the technical errors earlier. And I'm sorry for keeping you all waiting for 15 minutes. This has never happened before at an IDEAS event. Please bear with us as we try to find out what happened earlier. But anyway, good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us virtually at this IDEAS public forum entitled Perceptions Towards Discrimination in Malaysia. Firstly, may I say my sincere gratitude to His Excellency Michalis Rokas, Ambassador and the Head of Delegation from the European Union to Malaysia, for agreeing to deliver a pre-recorded welcoming remarks as he's unable to attend physically for this event. I would also like to extend my gratitude to our honorable guest today, YB Datuk Seri Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who had agreed to come here today, but unfortunately he sent us his very last minute regrets for not being able to attend due to some unforeseen circumstances. And he sent his apologies to everyone here. A special thanks to all of our esteemed speakers. Firstly, Ibrahim Sufyan, a friend and of course co-founder and director of programs at the Merdeka Center, who will be presenting to us the results of the final survey that IDEAS has conducted with regards to perception towards discrimination in Malaysia. The slides are very fascinating, and I'm sure that we'll have a very good discussion later after he presents his findings. To the panelists today, Professor Dr. Denizen Jayasuriya, Honorary Professor at KITA at UKM, and also Senior Fellow of ICERD Malaysia. Thank you so much for being with us. He is no stranger to the issues that we're discussing today. In fact, has been writing a lot on the subject in the past. Dr. Ryan Chua, the Program Director at Pusat Komas. Komas has also been a champion of anti-discrimination for many years, and we are very thankful that Ryan is here to share with us your insights and your experiences. Firdaus Husni, who is also supposed to be here, unfortunately has tested positive for COVID and won't be able to join us, but she's also a good friend. She's a Chief Human Rights Strategist at MCCHR, the Malaysian Center for Constitutionalism and Human Rights. Has also done a lot of work on anti-discrimination. So friends who are here, who are joining us on Zoom and on Facebook, today is the culmination of IDEAS project on national unity and interracial harmony. Today is our final webinar, and this project has been a really fulfilling one. It's been 2 years that IDEAS has worked on this project. We are funded by the European Union. So once again, thank you to the European Union for your support on this. We have worked so hard over the last 2 years to address some of the core issues around national unity and interracial harmony that Malaysia as a nation continues to face. Today, we mark this end by having this public forum, and we're also very proud to launch our Tanpa Perkauman graphic handbook today. And my colleague Ira will be bringing us through the handbook shortly. In conjunction with the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is happening in 3 days' time on the 21st of March, this webinar is actually conducted in conjunction with that day. And IDEAS is proud to share our very many works on the national unity issue. So among the many things, and I don't think I'm going to say every single thing that we've done, but some of the things that have stood out for us is working with Ingroup and Merdeka Center in producing survey and opinion reports. We've looked at interviews with 2,000 respondents in the first national poll, and this second national poll is what we are launching today, and we're going to be discussing. We've done various focus group discussions all across Malaysia. My colleagues went down to the ground, went to Kelantan, East Malaysia, in fact, to ask people what were their concerns, what were the challenges that they face with regards to racial discrimination in the country. We have organized 9 roundtable discussions with our CSO allies, including ABIM as well, Angkatan Belia Islam Malaysia, and we reached 106 persons from 49 organizations. The final roundtable will be conducted in March with high school students in collaboration with the government-affiliated NGO to present the project's findings and achievements. We are targeting to release 12 videos that are scheduled to be published on social media, and half of these videos by our partners, the fourth, are already published under the Sama-Sama label. And if you want, you can search for these, and I think hopefully my colleagues can share the links at the chat below as well to check out some of these videos, very exciting videos that put together people who disagreed on very controversial topics of discussion in Malaysia. And we managed to film this and put this out for public consumption. I hope that all of you get a chance to watch these videos. We collaborated with Imagine Malaysia to publish a total of 120 bilingual infographics on social media. And the quality of content is very, very high. Please do check them out on our social media as well. We've had a whole range of online webinars on affirmative action, race relations, and on the issue of Malaysian identity and narratives of nationhood. We've had online workshops with young people, young Malaysians. We partnered with the Architects of Diversity to train them on historical, legal, and writing skills. And we've had 21 op-eds. So we've worked very hard with people on the ground, with community members to ensure that there are safe spaces for them to discuss very sensitive topics of racial harmony. We've also met with very high-level members of the government. So we're very thankful to have met with 2 ministries, the Ministry of National Unity and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We've engaged with 5 opposition members of parliament who are supportive of ICERD. We've engaged with 3 opposition state assembly people who are also supportive of the same. We've consulted with 6 local experts, academics, consulted with CSOs, particularly the Muslim youth groups. And I must stop there to say that I'm very proud of the team for being able to reach out to communities and religious organizations that not necessarily have agreed with the positions that we as IDEAS have taken over the years. And I'm very proud of this because I think in a country and a society that is as diverse as Malaysia, it is very, very important for us to build these bridges and to make a convincing argument. But first of all, these things start with relationships. So let me share with you a couple of organizational lessons that we have learned while working on this project. And national unity, as you know, is a highly, hotly debated subject. Sometimes it feels as if we work so hard on them, but it seems that we go in circles and perhaps not achieving very much as well. So some of the things that we've learned is that, number one, partnerships are really important. I think these partnerships and engagements that we've had with many youth-led and multiracial groups, this is something that will help us to, as I said, build those bridges, and we will be able to enhance ideas, versatility, and stakeholder management in the future. So hopefully there are spillover effects into being able to build these bridges and allow those relationships to cut across other policy areas and agendas that we are working on as well. Secondly, we want to continue our efforts to be as inclusive as possible with gender balances and a diversity of communities from across Malaysia. And thirdly, I think, we started this project before COVID-19, and throughout the last 2 years, the pandemic really forced us to rethink how are we going to achieve the same objectives by shifting from the physical to the virtual, and therefore, public attention had to change from policy reforms on race relations and human rights to actually more mundane survival topics like economic income, family health, and how do we use those to have a real conversation about racial inequality and discrimination as well. I think the unstable political landscape also forced ideas to adapt our own engagement strategies and our own advocacy communication plans, be it with government agencies, MPs, or civil society organizations. Finally, I think, as you know, the handbook that we're launching today and the whole project had to do with racial discrimination, and we cannot shy away from that topic of ICERD. We understand that in the past, especially, there were great sensitivities around this particular international convention, but I'm again really proud of the team for being able to deliver the project's intended outputs in ways that allowed us to provide safe spaces. Many of our videos or infographics are a testament to the attempts of providing safe spaces to have this conversation, laying the ground for these sowing of seeds. And I really do hope that everyone that we've spoken to throughout the course of the last 2 years have absorbed and really felt the importance of speaking about national unity, and in fact, how an international convention of this nature can really help us to achieve anti-discrimination ultimately in a country like Malaysia, and to achieve the outcome of society harmony and diversity and stability, which is essentially what we all want to see in the country that we love. So here we are in this final webinar, and I'm really happy and look forward to seeing the final survey presentation by Merdeka Center, which will give us better insight on the perceptions of Malaysians towards discrimination, how we can work together to address the concerns of this very multi-layered issue of racism within Malaysian society, and specifically discuss by highlighting the efforts to ratify the UN's International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, elevating the values of diversity, tolerance, and stability. And with that, I'm happy that you've joined us today. I hope that you'll stay throughout the webinar. And it is my pleasure to launch this closing ceremony of the National Unity and Interracial Harmony Project of Ideas. And we look forward to engaging more in the future on the issue of national unity. And with that, I also hereby launch our Tanpa Perkauman graphic handbook, which my colleague will walk you through shortly. Thank you very much for being with us here today. And I wish you all the best. Enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trisha. Thank you for summing up our activities activities and our achievements that we have managed to do over the course of 2 years. And I'm glad that we have managed to reach out to the number of people that we have. Before I show all of you sort of a snippet of the handbook, I would first like to introduce all of you to the ambassador and head of the European Union delegation to Malaysia, His Excellency Michalis Rokas, who has prepared a video recording of his opening remarks for our online event today. So please enjoy his remarks, and I will see you again in a few minutes.
Honorable Dato Sri Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister of Foreign Affairs. Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tuanku Mukris, President of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, and to all those who are joining us virtually, a warm welcome. It is a great pleasure for me to be here to speak at the opening session of the final public webinar of the Promoting National Unity and Interracial Harmony project. First of all, let me congratulate IDEAS for organizing this important event and for the hard work for the past 24 months. The project has ensured extraordinary work despite facing challenges as a consequence of the global COVID-19 pandemic. In October 2021, Malaysia secured a seat at the United Nations Human Rights Council for the 2022-2024 term, following elections held during the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, with an overwhelming majority of 183 votes. Congratulations, Malaysia. This is a significant vote of confidence, which reflects the country's determination to continue to make progress to protect and promote human rights, both domestically and internationally. The European Union sees Malaysia as an ally in fighting against discrimination. And we do count on Dato Sri Saifuddin's commitment and pledge to speak out against systemic oppression globally. Later today, you will be hearing more about the infographic handbook Tanpa Perkauman Without Racism by Dato Sri Saifuddin. The IDEAS team will present the findings of the second round of the public survey regarding topics of identity, unity, and nation building. Furthermore, there will be a panel discussion on the perceptions towards discrimination in Malaysia to exchange views on the survey's findings, and a subject that is best presented and debated by local experts, our distinguished speakers today. Allow me to share with you experiences on this regard from the European Union, my large home region where I am most familiar with and I know best. Discrimination on the grounds of racial, ethnic origin is prohibited in the European Union since the year 2000. Yet, such discrimination persists in our society. The European Union's social, political, and economic strength comes from the unity in diversity. Racism weakens us all. Discrimination also means a failure to uphold core EU values. The EU can and must do more to ensure equal treatment and equality for all. To elaborate more on this, 2020 was an important year for the European Union. It was the year of actions for the Union of Equality. Let me highlight the messages that the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, delivered before the European Parliament in June 2020. I quote, "I am glad to live in a society that condemns racism, but we should not stop there. The motto of our European Union is united in diversity. Our task is to live up to these words and to fulfill their meaning." So in September 2020, the European Commission adopted an ambitious anti-racism action plan 2025 that steps up action against racism and brings together actors at all levels to address racism more effectively in the EU for the next 5 years. This is a first good step. It must be accompanied, though, by concrete actions. In October 2020, the EU Roma Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion, Participation between 2020 and 2030 was adopted by the European Commission. The framework sets a series of targets to be achieved by 2030 to promote inclusion in the 4 sectoral policy areas of education, employment, healthcare, and housing for the Roma nomadic communities. Additionally, the EU Human Rights and Democracy Action Plan sets an enabling framework to work on protecting people, eliminating inequalities, discrimination and exclusion, with the ambition to make anti-racism a key feature of our dialogue and cooperation with partner countries. In June 2021, the European Commission again appointed Mikael Amua, a former basketball player and official of the Finnish Justice Ministry, as its first anti-racism coordinator. What she does, she liaises with people with a minority, racial and ethnic background, reporting back to the European Union institutions. She also cooperates with EU member states, members of the European Parliament, civil society and academia to strengthen the European Union's policy responses in the field of anti-racism. So for us, combating racism requires continued leadership and engagement from all sectors. Our event today is a stellar example of the importance of the cross-sectoral collaboration, showing Malaysia's commitment in eliminating racial discrimination. This webinar is timely organized to celebrate the International Day of Elimination Against Racial Discrimination that it is observed on the 21st of March. The European Union and our member states will continue to fight for the global elimination of racial discrimination, to ensure that all human beings are free and equal in dignity and rights, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaims. The European Union is further committed to continue building sustainable partnerships with state authorities, civil society, and academic bodies, and other stakeholders to combat racism here in Malaysia. Therefore, we welcome the government's initiative to foster Malaysia's social cohesion through the Malaysian Family Unit Plan 2021-2025, which was launched the end of last year. We see the formulation of the Unity Plan and the National Unity Action Plan from 21 to 2030 as a further step which is going to achieve the required goals. We are optimistic that these initiatives are a signal that the government is determined about tackling racial inequalities embedded in the society. So the EU, the European Union and Malaysia, we mirror each other in a sense that our foundations are built on diversity. Malaysia is well known for being a multi-ethnic and a multicultural country, and Malaysians should be encouraged to embrace the differences and learn to draw strength from them. So I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you in Malaysia, all walks of life, to make sure these principles and ideas become a concrete reality and that they are supported through the EU-Malaysia partnerships. So, thank you very much for inviting me for this event in order to provide few words of different experience we have all gathered at the European Union. I wish you a very fruitful webinar. I'm very proud that the European Union has been able to support you in this endeavor. Terima kasih.
Sama-sama to His Excellency Michalis Rokas for those kind words and for giving us an insight into the European Union's very principled stance against racism and also all forms of discrimination. Before I hand over to the next session, let me just share with all of you what the handbook looks like, just so that you know what you will be looking for. So this is the cover page of the handbook. It's very beautiful ideas, and Imagine Malaysia collaborated to produce it. It's called Tanpa Perkauman, The Road to a Discrimination-Free Malaysia. And this is the first page. So we start off with laying the groundwork on understanding discrimination, the roots of racism, and we go on to discussing racialization and hate speech. And then we go, we take a deep dive into the history of Malaysia. And then we go into the various national unity policies that Malaysia has put in place over the years. And then we go into working towards a discrimination-free Malaysia, countering discrimination. And we talk about inclusivity and understanding ICERD. And lastly, we end with a call to action. And we give you a few options on how you can get more involved in the movement to end racial discrimination. So that's just a sneak peek, and hopefully that will tempt you to download the handbook in the link that's been provided to you. Okay, so next we will have a presentation of the survey by Merdeka Center, by Ibrahim Sufyan. So just a bit of background, in February 2020, IDEAS commissioned Ingroup to carry out a survey on the perceptions towards ICERD and race relations. That was the first of a two-part survey. And today I would like to invite Ibrahim Sufyan, who is the co-founder and director of programs at Merdeka Center, to present the findings from this second part of the survey, which is called the Perception Towards ICERD and Ethnic Relations in Malaysia. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Ira, and thank you, IDEAS, for organizing this very important event. I think more critically, this handbook that you have produced, I think, is an indicator of how civil society can take direct action to change the attitudes and the behavior of our society. I think as a nation, we have evolved quite far from where we were before, but we also know that we still carry the baggage of the past. This particular survey, which we are honored and privileged to implement, is something that speaks about, provides a snapshot of who we are as a country, and it attempts to look at two principal areas. Number one, it looks at the particular issue of ICERD, and how it came about, the perceptions that pervade the particular topic, what people perceive the topic to be. And the second, which I think is equally important, if not more important, is how we Malaysians look and interact with one another of different communal backgrounds. It looks at the areas where we trust each other, the areas where we want to seek change or no change, and particularly we also touch on the issue of discrimination, which we think found some very interesting results, which we hope that in time can then spur our society, our government, as well as other actors in society to take action, because it is not a small problem. I mean, a little bit of 1 minute on the genesis of this project. It started, in 2018 when the then, Pakatan Harapan government tried to ratify ICERD, which was not successful. But then, the work continued to be carried on by different civil society actors, and including IDEAS, which has taken the wonderful step of engaging the topic and producing this particular handbook. The survey itself comes into, to be honest with you, the survey is still being carried out, but what we are sharing with you are the results of nearly 90% of what already has been completed as of yesterday. So about 1,000 people have been interviewed, covering all 14 states, and the margin of error is about 3.3% at this point in time. We should be completed with the full survey, inshallah, by tomorrow, or latest by Sunday. It will be all fully completed and put to bed. But I can assure you, because the way we carried out the survey, the level of reliability is nearly there, in the sense that we have conducted the survey in terms of layers, so we've not left out any particular state or segment. And so the results that we are presenting is representative of the survey respondents, age 18 and above, Malaysians interviewed by telephone, covering all states, all constituencies, in the country. So covers urban and rural, Sabah, Sarawak included. Yeah, so these are the two parts of the survey. Part one is about the awareness and perception on ICERD. The second part is on ethnicity, interethnic relationship. This is a quick take on the respondent profile. I hope that ideas will share this with participants and make it available publicly. It just basically states that the survey respondents correspond with our national population, adult population profile. Before we go into the main body of the survey, I think we also need to share with you where people get informed, because where people get informed on topics that move them is important. In the current situation right now, we have 39% of respondents say they get most of their primary source of information on politics, on locally, on current issues and developments from the internet. But at the same time, we also ask whether they trust these sources or not. And that number is 48%, it's quite low. 25% say they still get it from TV, mostly from TV3, and smaller numbers from the different cable news networks. 71% actually still listen to the radio, particularly as they go about the daily chores and daily commute. And about only 5% get it from newspapers. But the trust level for the traditional organs of the media, television, newspaper, and radio is still quite high at over 70%. The internet is only trusted, at 48%. And here, when we look into the internet specifically, most people are getting on social media platforms, pretty much on YouTube and on Google News and things like that, but mostly Facebook, where people share news amongst their peers, amongst their groups of friends. So there is definitely a bubble effect at work. So people are getting more information from people who are like them, who are of the same persuasion. And this, in part, I think, influence how people process, perceive, and then internalize critical issues like ICERD, and also their perceptions towards other members of the community. Okay, the first part, which I want to touch upon, is on awareness and perception. I think the main thing here is to sort of see that the main takeaway point is that the level of awareness on ICERD is actually quite moderate. So we do have a situation here where this particular issue is championed through megaphone politics, it's politics through the media. It's a specific issue that most members of society don't really discuss in their normal lives. So it is clearly an issue that is in some ways manufactured in order to mobilize public sentiments and emotions towards a certain goal. Because when we ask people whether they understand what it is all about, less than 1/3 claim they understand. In fact, among the target audience within the Malay Muslim community, the level of people who understand is actually less than 30%. And yet, they are the ones that have the strongest opinions about ICERD, and we will go to that shortly. About half of the people in Malaysia support ICERD, but the level of support differs significantly along ethnic lines. It's very dichotomous. Bumi Putras, particularly Muslim Bumi Putras in West and East Malaysia, do not support ICERD in very large numbers. Non-Muslims support ICERD in very large numbers. And because of the makeup of our population, it comes out about even in this case. And I will show you that shortly as well. The other thing that's quite sad is that we found a majority of Malay Muslim respondents continue to believe to this day the conspiracy and a deep shadows narrative over the issue of ICERD. But yet, as a silver lining towards this issue, we found that 1 out of 10 Malay respondents report that their views have changed to the positive over the past 2 years. And I think this is a testament to ongoing civil society action and also open debate about issues such as this. Now we go into the details about awareness. Overall, 48% of Malaysians have heard about the ICERD issue. 51% or rather 52% have not heard it or don't know enough about it. Within the Malay community, the number is significantly higher. 60% has heard about it. We then ask them, do you understand the issues surrounding the topic of this International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination? Overall, 30% understand. Among Malays, it's only 33%. Sorry, I made an erroneous remark earlier. 33%, 1/3 understand this issue. But yet, when we ask them, when was the last time they heard about it? For most people, they didn't actually hear it at all. So this is where I say that it is a particular topic that was organized in some ways using a kind of dog whistle strategy, where only certain people who are attuned to certain topics will respond to this. 47% of most Malaysians have not heard the issue, but most people have heard it only 2 years ago. The rest of the people heard it a long, long time ago. So this is an issue that is fading into the background. Most people don't understand, but therefore they might have followed a bandwagon of leaders and speakers and influencers who spoke against this particular convention. When we move on to a subtopic of campaigns against discrimination, about 16% overall say yes, they have come across campaigns that go against discrimination. 23% of Malays have said that. So it's a testament that work by civil society and other actors to try and reduce the temperature, to try and improve understanding, has reached many of the ordinary members of the public. And with respect to the work done by Ideas, campaign Kita Bukan Kami, that has come across quite well, I would say. 21% of all Malaysians have seen it. 26% of Malay respondents have seen it. So it's quite successful. We go on to the next area of perceptions towards ICERD. And I think this is where things get more interesting, because bear in mind, while many people have heard about it, many people also don't understand it. And here we ask whether people support ICERD. And this is where we get a very dichotomous response. So if one looks at the top, on the left-hand box here, we have 61% of Malay respondents, mostly from Peninsular Malaysia, they do not support ICERD. But 88 and 90% of Chinese and ethnic Indian respondents support ICERD. So this is where, like, overall, it looks as if the support is half and half. It's actually 45 versus 48, but it is ethnically divergent in the sense that different communities have very strong opinions about it, diametrically opposed positions towards it. Likewise, we find that most of the non-Malays feel that ICERD brings more benefits than harm. Very low numbers of Malays believe that, only 1 out of 5. When we ask about whether they believe ICERD strongly threatens the position of Islam, we found that 63% of Malays continue to believe so, even up to this point in time. We also asked whether there's a hidden agenda. You know, in Malaysia, in our political discourse, everything has a hidden agenda, of someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. So that is a widespread public perception of things, because of our wayang kulit metaphors. 59% of Malays believe that there is a hidden agenda. Overall, it's 44%. And there was that giant rally which took place in 2018, December 2018. We asked them whether they felt this rally was a genuine effort to protect Malay rights, or just a political move to undermine the ruling government of that time. So overall, people were split. But then again, we have about 39% of Malays at that point in time believing that it was a genuine effort to defend Malay interests. So this is where we are, that the views on ICERD remains polarizing along ethnic lines. Majority of our Malay Muslim countrymen continue to believe in conspiracy narratives that underpin this ICERD topic. And I think more critically is that there remains a perception that ICERD actually threatens the position of Islam. So which means that a lot of the messaging that was carried out during those periods continue to linger and have been perhaps retained by many of the audiences of that period. Now, if you look at the attitudes towards ICERD now, whether there has been any change, we asked people whether in the last few years, do you think that your perception towards ICERD has changed? We found that low numbers among the Malays, but still 9%, quite sizable, nearly 1 in 10 have changed. And for most of them, it's actually changed for the better, that they have more positive towards it compared to what's negative towards it. We also asked about efforts by the government to introduce laws to prevent hate speech. And here we find overwhelming agreement for that. And finally, we asked whether would support for ICERD improve if statements that guarantee the position of the Malays via Article 153 was also mentioned. Then here we have a much stronger response within the Malay community at about 32%. And also majority agreement amongst minorities, amongst Chinese and Indian members of the public. Right, now we come to the second part, which is the attitudes towards interethnic relationships. So we move from ICERD and look about our daily lives and interactions among people. 3 areas are touched upon: identity, experience of unfair treatment or discrimination, and then the attitudes towards in-groups and out-groups. Here, in-groups mean people of the same ethnic background. Out-group would mean people of other, not the same ethnic backgrounds. First, on identity. I think this is one that's interesting and continue to reinforce what we at Merdeka Center have continued to find over the years. I think generally national and religious identity are almost equally strong among Malaysians. Of course, this is strongly influenced by ethnicity. But what's I think very interesting is that identification by ethnicity is very, very low. Only 8% of Malaysians actually identify themselves by the ethnicity. There are more people who identify themselves by gender, particularly women, see themselves as women first rather than anything else compared to ethnicity. So I think this is interesting how I think views have changed. I recall that years ago, maybe almost a decade ago, when we asked a similar question, the number of people, particularly even amongst the Malay community, who talked about seeing themselves first as a member of the Malay group was higher than 8-9%. So it's much higher than that. But in this particular case, we found that 48% of Malays see themselves as Muslims first. So this, I think, reflects on the primacy of Islam, the centrality of Islam in identity of ordinary Malaysia, that they mostly define themselves by that first. And then followed by being Malaysian, and then only 3rd or 4th as a member of the Malay ethnic group. So I think this is interesting. There are details in this particular survey, which I'm not showing you here, but it's made available. We found that, let's say within the younger Malay community, the identification of themselves as Muslim is significantly higher than that of older Malays. So younger Malaysians see themselves more as Muslims than they are with other identity markers compared to other groups and other Malays. With respect to unfair treatment or perceived discrimination, I think this is where we think it's quite interesting. We've done some surveys like this, and this survey again repeats the same kinds of results. What we notice is that, while I think the common narrative is that certain communities perceive to be or feel that they are discriminated more, the response from the survey is interesting in that nearly 40% of all Malaysians of all race and almost at equal levels say that they have been or perceive that they have been unfairly treated in the past. And it's over 2 principal areas. Number 1 would be about their ethnic background, and number 2 is about the class, the social economic class, basically the rich and poor, the inequality gap. We found that there are not significant differences between one group over the other. We find that 38% of Malays felt that they have been discriminated, Of course, higher amongst the minorities, more about 50 to 53% felt that they have been discriminated, and younger people have felt that they've been discriminated as well. So this is a question that I think opens up further questions and further investigation. There's more details here that we can, I think, discuss further in future events. But we do have granular data that's been provided with this that I think you can explore at your own time later. And finally, when we look at interethnic, it's about in-group and out-group attitudes. So attitudes towards people's own ethnic group and other ethnic groups. So we look at 5 different areas. Preferences for making friends, preferences for getting a partner in life, spouses, community leaders, teachers, and also neighborhoods. What we found here is that attitudes towards in-groups and out-groups, say for friendship, are about equal or about the same across most ethnic groups in the country, except for Sabah and Sarawakians, where they don't really care whether someone is the same ethnic group as them or otherwise. You know, that really doesn't matter. It's a bit higher amongst Malays at 14%, but it's not exceedingly high. 14% is a relatively small number. In terms of spouses, it's interesting. Nearly everyone, Malay, Chinese, and Indian, tend to have a preference of their own cultural community to select their life partners or spouses from. But within the Bumiputras, which is from Sabah and Sarawak, it's a lot less. It's significantly lower. So 80% do not mind what particular ethnic group their spouses are from. So I think speaks about the differences in culture and the level of multiculturalism that's being practiced there. When it comes to community leaders' preference, here we see very marked difference between Malay community members and Chinese, Indian, and Sabah and Sarawakian Bumiputras. Amongst Malays, nearly 60% want their leaders to be from their own group. But only tiny minorities from, or rather 80 to 90% of the other groups, do not really mind who the leaders are from. Perhaps they are minorities, but it also speaks about differences in how they view these things. We see the same patterns as well in terms of preferences for teachers. 90% of Chinese, 94% of Indians, 85% of Bumiputras and Sabah Sarawak, don't really care if the teacher is from another ethnic group, but it's only about 74% among Malays. Still very high, but still significant numbers from the in-group. Neighborhood preferences also show some similar patterns. 32% of Malays prefer to be in neighborhoods where their community is more dominant from the bigger number, but much less compared to other ethnic groups. Especially Bumiputras from Sabah and Sarawak, 84% do not mind. Indian community, 97% do not mind being in a multiracial neighborhood. So this, I think, speaks about some differences in preferences and perhaps cultural attitudes. In terms of, I think, overall in-group versus out-group sentiments, whether they trust someone from their own ethnic group more compared to other groups, we find that, of course, likewise in any other part of the world, in-group sentiments outweigh out-group ones, meaning to say that people trust their own community members slightly higher than that from people who are not from their own in-group, from their own ethnic background, perhaps due to culture, language, familiarity, and shared values. So that, I think, encapsulates the kind of general attitudes here. But the differences are not very, very large, as you can see from the statistics and also the charts here. Okay. And finally, I think we just go into the final bit, which is steps that could be done to improve inter-ethnic relationship. So 5 or 6 different items have been asked here. Whether would they accept, would they support, agree with creating more racially mixed neighborhoods? Overwhelming numbers of people support, more than 75% across the board. Political parties, should political parties be racially mixed? Again, vast majority support as well. 90% of everyone, about 78% among Malays. That just shows that even within the Malay community, acceptance of multicultural political parties is already there. People do understand the need to compromise and moderate politics. Introducing fair competition against overwhelming support, having policies to treat all religions equally against very strong across the board, but somewhat muted. I think with some hesitation within the Muslim Malay community. 59% are in agreement. So you do have about 40% who are somewhat in disagreement or uncertain about this. And I think what's critical here is assistance based on need, not on ethnicity. This is strongly supported across the board. 93% of Malay voters actually support this particular idea that assistance based on need, not on ethnicity. I think that's quite clear. The one area where there's a big dissension is on abolishing vernacular primary schools. For vernacular primary schools, 70% of Malays feel that there should just be single stream schools, but this is not shared with non-Malay respondents, particularly Chinese and Indian. The numbers are very small at 39 and 15% respectively. And it is something that I think should be seen as a strength rather than a weakness for interethnic relationship. Okay, concluding points. With respect to ICERD, I just want to reiterate that the level of awareness on this topic is moderate at best. It's a bit higher in the Malay Muslim community, but comprehension level is low, and that the issue itself has sort of faded into public memory. There is mixed level of support for this, and mostly along ethnic lines. Bumiputras in opposition to ICERD, non-Bumiputras in support, and there's significant belief in conspiracy narratives. These views can and is slowly changing, and it's through persistent public education effort. This support for ICERD can improve with guarantees on things like Article 153. And 1 in 5 people are aware of IDS's efforts. So this is, I think, strong results for civil society action. Next, on ethnic relations, 40% of people across the board report having encountered discrimination, higher amongst the minorities, slightly lower, but not significantly lower amongst the majority Malay group. Aside from East Malaysian Bumiputras, other communities show higher preferences for in-group friendship. Malays show higher preferences for their own ethnic group, for community leaders, teachers, and sometimes neighborhood as well. But I think the choices of neighborhood is not so strong, because when we ask them about efforts to change things, there is overwhelming majority support for mixed ethnic communities, non-racial political parties, as well as needs-based affirmative action. Only the vernacular schools topic has found us with dichotomous support. So I think it's to just take the key takeaways from the research that we found is that, number one, civil society action to address the lack of knowledge and debunk conspiracy narratives is needed in order to address misconceptions about things like ICERD and other important conventions. Most of the detractors of ICERD do not really understand their position and what it is all about. So a lot of people are just being carried by the bandwagon. I think the other important point from this research is that the incidence of discrimination across the board is across the board, and it's sizable and it's experienced by Malaysians in almost equal measure across the races. Of course, again, I have to iterate, it's higher amongst the minorities. While there are some differences in preference for same race friendships and leadership, the variances are not actually very large. Vast majority of Malaysians continue to appreciate the diversity and the richness that all the cultures offer us. As well, all the public holidays as well, that everybody can just tuang kerja. Malaysians share more points in common in efforts to improve race relations than things that divide them. Needs-based affirmative action, which I think is important, that has become a sacred cow amongst politicians. Actually, the public is ready for this change. I think the only area where things can be divisive would be vernacular education. And this is something that I think policymakers and civil society need to find a narrative to show that this is actually a strength rather than a weakness of our society, particularly in this very globalized, very competitive world where we need every single advantage that we can. And finally, I think the survey does show that dedicated and persistent civil society effort can help improve tolerance, moderation, and awareness about the idealized norms that society should aspire to. So I think with that, I would like to just conclude these presentations. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Ben. for some very fascinating findings. In particular, I was quite taken with your finding, the survey's finding that more younger Malaysians see themselves as Malay first, and also very nice to know that our campaign did get some traction amongst the public. I think that's very encouraging. Okay, so we will go into the panel discussion next. If any of you have any questions for Ben regarding the survey, we'll take it together with the panel discussion, the Q&A of the panel discussion later. Yeah, so we have two really great panelists joining us today, very esteemed in their own field. We have firstly Datuk Dr. Denison Jayasuriya, Professor Datuk Dr. Denison Jayasuriya, who is no stranger, I think, to the topic of national unity and interracial harmony. He's the honorary professor at the Institute Kajian Ethnic in UKM, and also a senior fellow at ICERD Malaysia, also very well known for his work on sustainable development goals. Secondly, our panelist is from Pusat Komas. He's the program director, Dr. Ryan Chua. So to both Dr. Denison and Dr. Ryan, please feel free to comment on some of the findings from the survey that Ben has presented, and also your own inputs about the topic that we have today. So I will give each panelist at most 15 minutes to share your thoughts, and then we can go into a Q&A if there are any. So Dr. Denison, I will give you the floor first. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to Ideas, Trisha, and the team for extending this invitation to me. And also, of course, I've always enjoyed Merdeka Center's, poll assessment and Ben's presentation, which is, I think, always quite balanced and quite revealing in the data that is unearthed from public perception and opinion, and the analysis that the Merdeka team does. Many of the findings, I think, concur with the thoughts that I have, and I would try and respond to that. I have not prepared any PowerPoint or anything, but to respond to the data that I heard so far. Firstly, I think I would like to congratulate Ideas and also Merdeka Center to keep the flag flying on thematic areas such as ICERD, interethnic relations, discrimination, in times when it is not politically so attractive to talk about them. But yet it is important to keep the thematic areas open for discussion, to create a safe space, and also have data and analysis in the way Ben had presented them to either strengthen the kind of analysis we have or debunk some of the thoughts that might be there. And I think that's important. And I would also like to congratulate that Ideas is remembering the ICERD Day, March 21st. Different NGOs, I know Komas has done that, Proham has done that, to host events to commemorate this theme. And ICERD, of course, is not a very popular topic to talk of, and it raises all kinds of concerns among different sections of our society on motive, intention, and so forth. I think I was especially attracted from the findings, and if I focus on the awareness and perception on ICERD, I think Ben's theme that came out quite strongly, that the majority of Malay Muslims believed in a conspiracy narrative over ICERD. I think the events surrounding the parliamentary debate, the protest, and so forth, is, I think, in many ways a dark chapter in Malaysian history, because much of that was moved or mobilized from a political agenda and through disinformation. And there wasn't sufficient leadership politically on all sides to stand up to the tide of disinformation at that point. And I know there were accusing fingers. It's well documented who said what during the period. It's on videotapes, and how the team was manipulated in ways for political objectives and ends. So I'm not surprised that that stuck on. It's not easy to say good things and people remember media, whether it's coming from social media or people's perception or people's sense of fear or their gut feelings. ICERD was definitely a period in which Pakatan Harapan government was not very united within its own ranks on a united front and position across board, and the defense to it and the public policy presentation was not strong enough. And obviously, I think what was said by Sufyan on the conspiracy, that means the awareness is high, everyone knows the term, but understanding it and the areas like, I think, is ICERD against Islam, ICERD and 153, the hidden agenda, I think is revealing the deep polarization on one hand, the distrust that might be there on this particular theme and issue. And this comes out within that context. And I thought moving beyond just the table and the thoughts is, why is it so easy in society for people to feel such, to feel that there is, to believe that there is a hidden motive, your rights are going to be taken away, and there is a lot of disservice that is being done by one political party across another, or a dominant community or political area. And I think the conspiracy theory or the nationalist political agenda that's not just prevalent in this country, but also in many parts of the world, where race, religion, national agenda, sense of identity, the protectionism is strong in many countries. Myanmar went through that, Sri Lanka, even the US during the Trump sort of struggle to recapture the political space. I think in many ways, the understanding of ICERD, its understanding of the federal constitution, are areas that need to be strengthened in that process. Although we have compulsory history, we have civics lessons, we have ethnic module. It depends what is being drilled into people's minds when they have the information or don't have the information, and it's disinformation in that context. So the conspiracy narrative, I think, dominated the ICERD discussion. To add on to that theme, in my preparation of a booklet and a document that was prepared, on understanding ICERD in the wider context of the federal constitution, human rights, and Malaysian society that was commissioned by the United Nations Malaysia in terms of a sociological understanding of that period, and to bring a document out that documents everything, and it's translated into Bahasa Malaysia and made available through KITA UKM, was prepared and released last year sometime. Now, in doing that preparation, I listened and read. I listened to the parliamentary debate that was recorded during that time. It was a conversation between the minister concerned, YB Senator Vedamurthy, and a number of then opposition members of parliament, largely from UMNO and other parties that were then opposition, but now government, raised some very strong questions that emerged. Now, what I felt was, and in my reading of the Handbook, and I document them in this book, is that all the questions were valid questions, but the answers and the details were not sufficiently presented in a way. That's one. Two, I think all of us are familiar in listening to parliamentary discussion. I think there needs to be a real talk to members of parliament on how to behave in parliament in terms of certain parliamentary style of debate, that you allow one person to speak and then you rebut and then you speak and you rebut, sort of, a healthy gentleman respect for each other in that context is quite important. And I think the quality of debate, the shouting, and the distortions that took place through the parliamentary process created great damage in the Malaysian context. And documents of this nature and the work that IDEAS is bringing out is essential to help build a culture in which there is open thinking, rational discussion and debate, and the ability to agree in public and disagree and have respect for one another, and not to try and distort the information for a political end in itself. And that actually leads on to further analysis on the ground on the various kinds of things that Ben and the Merdeka Center has highlighted. Because in recent times, I have visited and spent some time in Pasir Mas, in Jeli, in Tumpat, and I've found as a non-Malay Muslim visiting Kelantan and into the kampongs and into the interiors, actually very cordial, loving response, which is very different to the sort of politicized picture and agenda that we sometimes hear in these kind of areas. And I think it is important, and I think the PH government tried to dismantle certain institutions in the Prime Minister's department. The PN government introduced the National Unity Ministry, the National Unity Blueprint. And I think there needs to be a far stronger concerted effort in building and addressing some of these concepts, like vernacular school or views that are very polarized, but having opportunity for us to sit down and discuss it in a way that is far more open, so that you don't get the kind of aggregations that Chinese or Indians view it this way and Malays view it another way. But going to Kuala Selangor, I found that Malays identify themselves as Javanese, or in Parit Bunta, they identified themselves as, what is the group? Banja community, and so forth. The disaggregated sub groups might be necessary to recognize that as well, that it's not just Malay, Chinese, Indian. There could be variations because Indians likewise very many subgroups that might view things differently as well. So I think what is important for us is ongoing open discussion and analysis of data in a way that will enable us to address these concerns. And it is important, and in the document that I prepared and the other follow-up materials, that the right picture and accurate understanding of ICERD as part of universal international commitment and aspiration, and that non-acceding to ICERD is a great disservice to the community and the nation as a whole, because we are among some difficult countries that have not acceded to ICERD, and especially in a year when Malaysia is part of the Human Rights Council, it might be necessary to look at the fundamental struggles that was there in that period. Is it against Islam? Is it against Article 153? What is the position of Article 8 in terms of equality and Article 153? So that there is a more public, civic, citizenry openness to trash these out in building a better Malaysia for all Malaysians. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dato' Denison. Very, very valuable sharing. And I would also like to add that the guidebook that Dato' Denison produced on the constitutional aspects of ICERD that was produced by UNDP was a really brilliant and important resource for our own campaign and ideas. So thank you so much for that. And I believe that it will be continue to be a valuable resource for those who want to have a more factual and objective discussion about the merits of ICERD. So thank you for that. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Ryan Chua, who is the Program Director for Pusat Komas. Please go ahead, Ryan. The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
All right. Thanks, Ira. I hope everyone can hear me. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate IDS for the 2 years effort. And I think there were a few conversations that we have done together alongside, in the whole entire process. And we are more than happy to be able to assist with this endeavor. And, this is a really good opportunity for us to have such discussions, especially what had happened back then in 2018. And of course, that fantastic presentation by Ibrahim from Merdeka Center, I think it gives a really good overview of the situation. First and foremost, I think a lot of the issues pertaining to ICERD, I think Dr. Denison has mentioned, and I think it captures really a lot of what had happened. In fact, we gave a chronology as well to what actually transpired. And it was actually based on one of the parliament sessions where YB Khairi, at that point of time, he was the one who raised the question in Parliament. And of course, there were a lot of finger pointing here and there, talking with regards to the issue and much more. Now, from our side, I mean, those findings from Merdeka Center was actually really an eye-opener. And of course, there were a lot of questions on the in the chat as well, asking and saying, how then do we, and what are the reasons to address such issues? In fact, we in Pusat Commerce have been championing and have been advocating for ICERD ratification since 2009. And of course, I think Dr. Dennison is aware, there were a lot of research that were done in terms of ICERD ratification even back then until today. And this has really raised a lot of concerns, raised a lot of ideas. In fact, in some of the initial studies or research that were conducted by the Malaysian government, in fact, they were actually pro signing and ratification of ICERD. It's just that our government at that point of time did not have that political will. They are also quite cautious in terms on the way on how they should portray, or how should they position themselves. Because one of the misnomers that people get in terms of ICERD ratification is that if you sign something, if you sign a treaty, immediately your country you had to make changes in a day. But that's not what international conventions act or serve to be. So I think that is a lot in terms of the perceptions on the ground. A lot of people do not understand about international treaties, international conventions, and this requires us a lot in terms of how we should really address these issues. But I find some things really interesting from Ibrahim's sharing, but I was just thinking, allow me to also just share some of the findings that we have done from Commerce, but probably we could just provide better understanding to the situation on the ground. Especially, there were a lot of questions with regards to how do people view, we know that there are also a lot of perceptions in terms of like interethnic anonymity and much more, but really how then do we actually, what are the contributing factors? So I'm just going to share my screen now at this point of time, and then probably then you will be able to understand a little bit with regards to what am I going to share about. So what had happened then was Commerce actually embarked on a study, and we did interviews with around 40 individuals trying to understand what do people really think or how do they perceive being a Malaysian. And our findings actually found out that being a Malaysian is being ambivalent. That's like, it's good to be a Malaysian, but there are also certain things negative that comes together being identified as a Malaysian. And just to give you a brief understanding of what we have done in our research, firstly is that we conducted semi-structured interviews with 40 participants, and they come from 10 different localities. So there were 25 males, 15 females, with an average age of 36 years old. The minimum age is 21, the maximum is 58, and it covers a wide variety of Malaysians across Malaysia. So some questions that we have asked is like, do you see yourself as a Malaysian and identify yourself as a Malaysian, or can you see yourself as both your ethnicity and Malaysian? And this ethnicity is that if they are an Indian, we will ask, okay, can you see yourself as an Indian and being a Malaysian, or can you see yourself as a Malay and Malaysian, for example? And how do you think Malaysia is perceived by those who are living outside of Malaysia? Of course, there are a list of other questions which we have not included here, but this is just a snapshot of some of the questions that we have asked our participants. And the outcome is rather interesting because being a Malaysian can be very complicated, even for a lot of our Malaysians. So they have mixed feelings and contradictory ideas about being a Malaysian. And that's the reason why we are saying that it's an ambivalent, it's a state in which they have mixed feelings. I'm happy to be a Malaysian, but at the same time, I feel a little bit careful about, or a bit upset being a Malaysian. And people see both advantages and disadvantages of being a Malaysian, and they take pride at certain aspects, but they also take embarrassment and being unhappy in certain aspects. So what then are the positive perceptions? So now, one of the key things that Malaysians themselves feel is that they can preserve and uphold each Malaysian's cultural heritage. And I think this really relate very strongly to what Ibrahim has mentioned earlier, where when the beauty of being in Malaysia is that, if I'm a Malay or I'm a Chinese, I'm an Indian, I'll be able to practice and uphold my own cultural heritage. And that is where we find a sense of pride. That's where most of our interviewees shared that, I'm happy to be a Malaysian because that's where I can embark in that whole cultural baggage that I have with me. And I'm able to practice it without other people coming to me and say, look, why are you acting like a Chinese? You should assimilate. But that's not the case in Malaysia. that's where, people feel that, I'm comfortable, I'm happy because I'm able to uphold those cultural heritage that I have with myself. And of course, that combination, of course, in that sharing earlier, we have found the different percentages of the choice of mixed marriages and much more. But that combination, the culmination that comes from there creates a whole unique Malaysian culture is something that a lot of Malaysians are proud of as well. And this is something, the next point is something a little bit quite interesting, that living in a diverse environment at the local family and community level is something that they are proud of. So that whole neighborhood kind of thing that we were talking about, we have been hearing from that sharing earlier, is something that Malaysians take pride of. And also the key point here in terms of, they are able to tolerate one another in terms of others' cultural practices, values, and beliefs. But then what happens then is this, because certain perceptions of positivity has also met with a lot of negative feedback after that. So when one group comes to you and try to impose one's cultural values and beliefs onto the others, and that's where they feel a little bit not easy lah. It's like, oh, kenapa, why do I have to start to shred that whole cultural identity that I have within myself just to uphold and to make you happy? So the other part is also the lack of diversity in their learning and developing environment. So this is where we can see the great the contrast. At one point, they feel that, oh, we are living in a diverse environment where we have a group of people coming together, living together happily. We are able to learn about other ethnic groups. But of course, there are also some who say that, I have only met a person from another ethnic group only when I go out and buy something. So this is something which is rather interesting because this is based on one of the interviews as well. The participants say, she only met people from the same ethnic groups until when they are in their teenager time, that they only begin to get to know about other ethnic groups and other ethnicities. And so, really their whole life, for their whole 15 to 17 years of life, they have only been meeting and engaging with people from one ethnic group. And this is something that people are feeling really upset about. And also there's a lack of understanding and respect of others' culture and ethnic identity. That's why you can see a lot of triggered posts when Tun Dr. Mahathir came up with the chopstick remark. People are saying, oh, why are you not respecting? How can you say holding chopstick is something like that? So these are some things which people feel negatively associated. They feel negatively, they perceive things very negatively. And there's also a stronger attachment towards local identity rather than the national identity. And that's where we were talking with regards to what Ibrahim has been sharing about. I feel and I can identify with things which are closer to me than the whole national narrative. And this is rather strong, of course, with the Sabahans and the Sarawak. But truth to be told, even people in Penang whom we have interviewed had also mentioned that they hope that Penang could be a country by its own. And this is not only limited to Penang, even to Selangor. Selangor, some of the participants have said that we hope that Selangor can be a country by its own. And this is where things, where we find the dissonance. At one end, we have a national narrative that we have to come together, but people still feel very closely and they don't feel that they're being treated well. And I think these findings, to a certain extent, confirms and also provides meaning to what Ibrahim has shared earlier in terms of how do they actually feel. So when I heard about the sharing earlier, I felt that, wow, whatever that was shared, it's actually covered in our research. And this is something, the sentiments on the ground and the people's perception of how they view to be a Malaysian. So people are increasingly separated from each other and there are increasing suspicion towards one another. And this is the actual reality on the ground. That's what's happening. And from a psychological point of view, groups can view members from another group as a threat. So this is the in-group, out-group conversation that we are talking about. So racial tension builds and can lead to expressions in the form of discrimination. And this is what is happening. So the thing is that we are here on to talk about the International Day on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and all forms of racial discrimination and racism. And one of the other initiatives that we have done in COMAS is really to try to document the instances of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia. And this is just based on the media monitoring and whatever we have seen, that the general public still have certain levels of trust, like 74% of trust to news media, as well as also to on to the TV and all that kind of stuff. So what we have observed over the 7 years, of course, this is something that we will be releasing only next Monday, but I'm already giving snippets of it. So let's see what is it all about, because we'll be giving an in-depth analysis of everything next Monday. But I will be more than happy to just share a little bit here. So this is a trend over 7 years in terms of the incidence of racial discrimination that was reported in the media. So we have gone through rigorous scrutinizing, we have gone through and looking it back towards ICERD definition on how they look through racism, racial discrimination, and much more. And as you can see, from 2015 to 2021, you can see the trends going up and down. If you take note, in 2018, there's an highest number of incidences of racial discrimination that have taken place, or incidences of racism. And what does this indicate? 2018 is the elections, and race and religion has been a key position, a key way on how political parties and politicians play the game. And similarly, in 2021, we also have by-elections in Malacca and much more, which we have seen that race and religion has actually been used as a tool to stir and rile the people up. So in 2019 as well, you can see there's a drop, but that's where the things are becoming more heated up. And of course, in 2020, when there's a change of government, the trends has dropped tremendously. So this is something that we have to take note that, we are also playing by the game of the politicians, political actors, and also certain groups and individuals who are also trying to espouse their thinking of that we should be looking at things from the race and religious perspective. So from what we have found 7 different trends: racial and religious politics, provocation, xenophobia, and we also found in the education sector, where the whole conversation of vernacular schools, for example, why there were a lot of people who were against vernacular schools. And I totally agree that we should look at vernacular schools as a way on how we could actually maintain or look at and be proud of being diverse. Because again, when a group of people attack vernacular schools, it's already an attack to a group's cultural heritage, because they are very proud. For them, vernacular schools would uphold their cultural heritage. And when a group comes to these vernacular schools and say we have to abolish our vernacular schools, you are already creating a perception of fear, a perception of threat towards my own cultural identity. And this is what had happened. So people becoming a little bit more anxious, people become a little bit more they become angry, they become upset because of all these different instances. And to a certain extent, the funny thing is that when it comes to the argument of vernacular schools, we often only target the vernacular schools, but we do not touch on the other sectors of education. So if you are to abolish vernacular schools, then what about religious schools? What about private schools? What about international schools, which are all up there? So why only target one sector of schools where there are also other sectors of schools which will require changes? So this is a bigger conversation. Of course, I won't be covering more and discussing more about this. It's just an overview of what we have observed. Of course, racism in the media and internet is also something that we have found, and also in the business sector. And of course, we have in other sectors like health, humanitarian assistance, and also in terms of sports. And of course, we have to also acknowledge that there are also efforts undertaken. This will be my last few slides. So this is a total number of efforts that have been taken to promote or to combat racial discrimination. And we have found a whopping increase to 61 efforts. So I have to say, of course, we have the Keluarga Malaysia kind of initiatives and much more, but we have to be a little bit cautious in terms of its implementation. Because up to this point of time, we have not seen effective implementation, and we have seen a lot of contradictory responses in terms of what has been said and what has been preached. So for example, when we talk with regards to our Prime Minister's recent statement, he said we have to be inclusive, we have to take care of other ethnic groups, and then the next moment he introduced new policies which only favors a particular ethnic group. So this is something which does not go in coherent with what has been told, and this has created a lot of dissatisfaction on the ground as well. So it's a lot of hypocrisy that was shown there. It's just that because they believe that the use of race and religion is still needed for them to ensure and to protect their power. So this is some things that I have some snapshots. Of course, a more detailed I'm going to take this time for some PR part as well, just for others, for more detailed explanation. We'll have our racial discrimination report that will be released next Monday. Of course, if you are free, by all means, please join us as well. You can get more information on the more detailed analysis there. And of course, if there are any other information that you would need, you can always come to our website. We have done a few research as well, also as to look at how legal compilation on how ICERD would also work in tandem with Sharia laws and the Federal Constitution of Malaysia. And these are some of the efforts that we have undertaken to try to speak against to provide counter narratives to what people have understood about ICERD at this point of time. So I have this just to share with you for a short while, but I'll be more than happy to answer a lot the other questions that have came up with. So thank you very much, and Ira, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan from Pusat Komas. Yes, so one of my colleagues will be attending the launch of the report, and we look forward to that. And well done to Komas as well on your own research work on this important topic and the report that you launch every year, and I think that's an important contribution to this discourse. So we started later just now, so we will end at about 5:15. We will go into the Q&A session now, and after the Q&A, my colleague will share the feedback form for this event, and we will pause for about 5 minutes just to give you some time to fill it in, and before I end the event. Yeah. Okay, so there are some questions here, which I will sort of group together, and then Ryan, Dato' Denison, and also Ben can answer them in turn. Okay, so in the Q&A box, there are questions from Muzaffar Shah Melo and from Dr. Lee Hock An. So Muzaffar asks, is legislation an effective tool to prevent racial discrimination in our country? So that's one question. And then I'll just read out Dr. Hock An's question. Yeah. So this is not the first survey that finds personal lived experience of discrimination to be much lower than perceptions of the prevalence of discrimination. Are Malaysians inflaming the issue out of proportion, or when people are asked if there is discrimination, they tend to close ranks with their in-group and latch on to presumptions and become prone to sensationalized messaging about discrimination or racism? Ben, I think this is for you, so you can take that one. And I think maybe Dato' Denison can take the question after this on do we need legislation to be an effective tool to prevent discrimination? Ben, go ahead first.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate Hock An's response to the survey. I have the view that yes, while the reported experience of discrimination seems to be lower than what is actually perceived out there, and the numbers are like about 40% amongst Malays and slightly over 50% among non-Malays, I still feel that, for me personally, I still feel that's very high. Because it means that nearly 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 Malaysians feel that at some point in their lifetime, or perhaps even recently, they have experienced being treated differently because of their skin color or their ethnic background, or much less their socioeconomic status. And I would imagine that this takes place in the place of work, in the place of education, or even in their communities. And for me, it's quite high. So it doesn't take a lot of, given that such high numbers, 30 to 40%, up to 50% of people who have such experience, it doesn't take a lot of effort to inflame or inflate the sentiments that are already existing, because it just means that in a particular household, at least 1 or 2 persons in the household has already had that experience. And so that experience is most likely shared. So even if one has not been targeted or have not really been discriminated, one sibling or parent or child might have undergone through such experience, and that colors the overall perception and creates such a big negative perception about how things are. It also means that it's very easy to inflame public opinion and mobilize public opinion towards one side or another. And therefore, I think strategies must be found to address this. And I think first and foremost, and also trying to partly answer some of the questions that was in the chat box earlier, because as I think some more about it, I think I can maybe improve my response. I think what's needed is also developing a stronger and more robust counter narrative, that such views that promote racist or xenophobic or just outright bad ways of looking at other people, that needs to be addressed aggressively in society. It should not be tolerated. People. I think that's very key, because I think when I look at things like Malaysia as a small country and a country that actually subsists by trading, really needs to get out of these ways of thinking, because we are small and we have to be able to relate to the rest of the world, and therefore we must be able to address our own internal issues that keep our house from being in order, so that we can go out there and compete in the world outside. And I do so because I'm looking at the context that while we are arguing about when is our election going to be, and you know, about land reclamation and stuff like that, you know, our neighbor is having their cabinet meeting in a campsite looking at their future capital. They are talking about fantastic stuff, and we are still, you know, arguing over the same issues for 60, 70 years. So I think as a country, we really need to grow up and move on and start to understand that we all have to work together, that the differences that we have in our community, the different types of schools and languages is actually an asset rather than an impediment for us. I think as an individual, I strongly feel about this. One of my greatest regrets is that I'm not able to speak more than Malay and Chinese. You know, I wish I learned Javanese from my parents because we come from a Javanese village. At least I can like buat duit lah in Indonesia. But you know, it's a loss. And by not being able, I think as a Malay, I think by not being able to read and write or learn Chinese, I'm missing out on a hell of a lot of information out there. You know, literature, knowledge, science, and all kinds of ethics and things like that. Likewise, things in the Indian language. So I think we have to see things in a different point of view, because I think we are here not just to subsist, but also to strive for something bigger than ourselves.
Thank you, Ben. There are two more questions now, but before that, Datuk Dennison, do you want to respond on the is there a need for legislation to prevent racial discrimination? And I think you can take one more on do CSOs and think tanks doing work on these issues have any impact on actual policy making, and have any inroads been made with government? Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in terms of national legislation, the NUCC, National Unity Consultative Council, some time ago, did call for a National Harmony Act, and there was specific reference to hate speech, as well as in the area of mediation, because where there is conflict, misunderstanding, to have an alternative judicial process, which is different from police reports, but mediation in terms of trying to find some solution to it. There is a mediation act now. The Bar Council and others actually utilize that. It's more utilized by private sector, but it's not being focused like the Singapore Community Mediation Act in Singapore. So there is a place there. But discrimination in itself has a broader theme. We've got discrimination in the context of gender. We've got discrimination in the context of class and experiences of people within that context, and ethnicity or sub-ethnicity. And the possibility of having a commission of some kind that can conduct inquiry or look at the areas where there is a complainant to, let's say, a job opportunity that might stigmatize them because of race or their religion or their dressing. Then if there's a grievance of that sort, it could have an effect. But that alone is not enough. Years ago, there was a call for an Equal Opportunities Act, which is complained by certain sections that they were discriminated in the private sector, as some feel discriminated in the public sector through their job opportunities and things of that sort. So there is a place, but the political will to address the NUCC has been quite slow, although the national unity policy came up. But while there are many good things there, it did not give any focus in that context to Article 8 of the Federal Constitution. So I would agree that there needs to be a far deeper understanding or public understanding or popular understanding of the Federal Constitution in the context of Article 8 and Article 153. And 153, I think those of us who have written from a legal point or sociological point will recognize that it is to protect not just the interests of the Malay and native population, but also the legitimate interests of other communities. So possibly a more regulatory framework to manage that, or unhappiness over that areas might be necessary in that form to look at. Just to add a small point, I was recently in Tumpat, in an island, and the people said for 60 years, they have asked for a bridge that they could not get. And then I asked them, kenapa you tak boleh dapat jambatan? Then they told me, diskriminasi. So I stood up, I said, apa macam diskriminasi? You are Malay, you are Muslim, how can you be discriminated? Dia kata ini isu politik. So federal, state, religion, voting, and so forth. We were down in Parit Bunta with a fishing village where they felt they were being discriminated by bigger fishing groups, and they were isolated and felt powerless in that context. So it will be interesting if we look beyond the traditional boundaries to bring gender, class, location as well. I'm not minimizing ethnicity, but I think we need to look at it from the broader areas. Is civil society making an impact on some of these areas? I think the very fact that IDEAS is looking at ICERD and keeping the flag flying beyond COMAS and other groups in itself is an indication. The advocacy and the awareness and build on can take time in different periods, opportunities for parliamentary discussions through the all-party parliamentary group or through select committee and other forms. Civil society has always found creative avenues to keep the agenda going in very restrictive times and not. So is it making an impact? I think it is. Politicians today are more conscious about public opinion. Are we able to impact Malay voters, thinkers in that area? Then I think that is where we seem to be polarized because of the language, the background, understanding the sentiments. And in recent times, we going and sitting in kampongs and so forth gives a different dimension of the struggles on the ground. And I think we are resolved through the SDG work, where we take the theme of leaving no one behind, that we will champion the cause of poor Malay communities, whether in Tumpat, in Pasir Mas, in Parit Bunta, that they are as disadvantaged within a system that so-called says they have special position when they are actually struggling on the ground, and struggling more than other urban-based communities. So civil society has a major role, I would feel, in the work. I think COMAS has extended out to the states and so forth. It's really to go to the district level, where our presence, the language, the articulation, and finding solidarity with the poor, like going on a boat, going to the mangrove swamp, for them to show you that the fish or the prawns is no more. And they are asking us to champion their rights, and for us to make that as an issue. Thank you. Sorry for taking more time.
Thank you, Dr. Denison. Ryan, I see that you want to say something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond on the CSO's initiative. So unfortunately, we are not as lucky as IDEAS to be able to meet the Ministry of Unity. I mean, we are still trying our very best. I don't know whether Dr. Denison has access there, but we have not received any positive response from them. But I would want to just share some of the initiatives that we have done, because at the Fed, we use a multi-pronged approach in terms of addressing issues like this. So we have actually worked with the Penang state government, and they have came up with a specific code of conduct on the promotion of equal opportunities in the private sectors. So this is one of the initiatives that we have done. And what had happened was it has been endorsed by the Exco of Penang, the Penang Excos, and now they are coming up with monitoring mechanisms and also implementation mechanisms and much more. So to a certain extent, I think, yeah, we have to try multi avenues to also approach such issues, and the Penang state government, for example, is a good example on how we could actually propagate the ideas of non-discrimination. In fact, the code of conduct also encompasses and embodies the spirit of ICERD. So it really promotes no racism, and it follows the definition of racism based on ICERD and much more. And we have done similar approaches with the Negeri Sembilan state government, as well as also the Selangor state government, and I thought it would be good for me to bring it up here as well, that the Selangor state government is actually in the process of coming out with a unity blueprint for the state by itself. And I think IDEAS is aware, and I think Prof. Denison is also aware that they've done a lot of consultation and much more. In fact, the Exco, Dr. Siti Maria, has also mentioned that they wanted to actually adopt the code of conduct that we have done in Penang to also be implemented and to be included in the state legislations and policies. So I think in the Sabah state, it's a totally different kind of thing, but we also met communities on the ground and have discussions of sorts. So I think it varies accordingly to again, it comes down to political will. At the federal level, we may not be well received. By the state levels, we have heard of numerous initiatives in which the political parties themselves are convinced and they have the will to actually try to do something. So I think CSOs have to find creative ways, but of course this is quite difficult because we had to maneuver. One moment they will clamp down on us, they are not happy with whatever we are doing, and then next, because in the end, if whatever we are doing are going to threaten their political stability, that's where they're going to stop us from doing any of those. But we are quite fortunate to have other states to be privy and open to assist us in such initiatives. Yep.
Thank you, Ryan. To know that COMAS is quite actively working with state governments, because I think that is a very important route, and possibly a bit a lower hanging fruit than the federal government lah. Okay, so we have two more questions, and looking at the time, I think this will have to be our last. So there's one from Samuel Chua. He asked about the survey. So the survey found that high numbers agree that political parties should be mixed. Does this mean political parties based on race may no longer be relevant? And secondly, another question from Hock An, policies that promote diversity and equitable representation, whether ethnic, gender, religious, language, etc., often have to take into account identity, aka positive discrimination or affirmative action. How do such policies fit with anti-discrimination principles? So I will go in turn. So Ben, Datuk Denison, and then Ryan can answer, and then we can close off. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'll take the first question regarding political parties. It's a very simple question that asks whether people accept political parties be open or representing all races. So on the surface of it, this question looks innocent, and vast majorities of Malaysians agree that political parties should cater for all. But we've done a lot of research on this, and what we found is that different communities have different take on what it means. For minorities, ethnic Chinese, Indian, and also people in Sabah Sarawak, for the most part, they would rather have a political party or coalition specifically that has equal say. I think the main thing is this: I think people are not expecting legislation to ban political parties that represent a particular ethnic or religious or regional group. I think people are just saying that they're open for parties like this to contest. But in terms of operationalizing it, making it in real life, practically speaking, people do understand that in Malaysia you need to have coalitions, and that these coalitions can either be dominated by a Malay party which represents the interests of the majority, or B, a coalition that is made up of different parties and each having equal say, like a bit like Pakatan Harapan back in the day, and then or C, like a purely Malay coalition. What we found was that majority of the Malay population actually wants a mixed ethnic coalition, but the Malay party having a senior role. But for non-Malay respondents, generally they want all parties having equal say lah, as expected. So that's where we roughly are. But the vast majority people sort of want that mixed ethnic representation, but the difference is who's more senior, who has more say. And I think that differentiates our political situation right now, and also partly explains why, even in last weekend's election in Johor, Pakatan Harapan really struggled to get Malay votes. I think only about 10-11% Malays voted for Pakatan Harapan, and so that just shows the difficulty of trying to promote multicultural politics when everything else is set in very ethnic terms. With respect to the second question from Hoan, I don't have much expertise here. I think I'll just say that this is something, for me, civil society, along with actors in society, need to begin the public education process, so that not everything has to be only in done in ethnic terms. That there are other variables from which people can be be discerned with, and it also means that there is a need for more active and robust campaigning and counter narrative to address the more single ethnic or even xenophobic type of narratives that we tend to see these days, because I think that's what's needed.
Thank you. Datuk Denison, please go ahead.
Okay, I think I'll take Hokan's point, but between the lived experiences of people, and this is where I was trying to point out that in the Malaysian context, we have certain experiences of where one feels you are being discriminated and so forth. But when you walk the street, when you go to a Malay kampung and sit down, you see their hospitality and so forth. The feeling and the vibes you really get during political live cast of their speeches or some parliamentary discussion or areas. This is very much in contrast to the kind of scenes you see in New York, the hate over Asian Chinese, over COVID, or the kind of hate in the neighborhood, or even in recent times with the policy changes in India over Muslim women's headgear and the kind of public action or hate action that you are seeing. But I think there is a reality of experience that people feel they can't get a job or a position, and in some cases they are not even wanting to aspire for it. And there is then this feeling to live and let live within the context because it's better than another situation. But ideally, if Malaysia addresses some of the root issues in terms of over-representation of certain communities in the civil service, and to then draw a balance, much of the earlier development plans had specific targets of wanting to increase non-Malay participation in the civil service, in certain positions, to really visibly see it. It could take place in local authorities, so that there is a fairer representation there. And on the private sector as well, and to respond to specific areas of grievances that people are having in their inability to access certain things. So in any discussion, if you sit down, like we are doing in focus groups, and talk to, let's say, just Malay group of fishermen or paddy planters or flat dwellers, all their grievances are coming out. But they are not using ethnic terms there. But if you have a group of Indian seater, their feeling would be they are being deprived. It's the same issues of employment, income, access to education. It's the messaging and their experience within majority, minority areas. So we need to address this, and the National Unity Team, Rukun Tetangga, these sort of groups are not addressing it sufficiently and on the ground as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dato. Ryan, over to you.
All right. So
before I go to the feedback, yeah.
Okay,
please,
yeah.
please.
So just to respond to Dr. Lee Hock An's question, yeah, I mean, it's a very intricate thing, and I think in your own writing as well, you have also you also mentioned that there are a lot of class inequalities as well that's happening. So I think, of course, the representation of we need equal representation if that's possible, to promote diversity. And I think what Dr. Dennison has mentioned, especially within the Indian communities themselves, they feel that they are also underrepresented to a certain extent. So of course, if you look through ICERD, it allows affirmative action such as this. But of course, we really need to look through, do we really need to move into a needs-based approach? And I think you have clearly, written in your papers as well on how we should address it. When we are addressing matters pertaining to this, even within the Malay communities and the Bumi Putra communities, there's also big clear class differentiation, which are also impacting the issues. That's why they are still feeling that they need they need the affirmative action to assist them. And of course, when we have policies which only favors based on an ethnic-based perspective, but not from a needs-based approach, it becomes a little bit more tedious. And of course, when we have affirmative actions like this, ICERD allows affirmative actions and special measures like this to take place, but it has to be time-bound. So until those objectives are met, and I think that's where the clear definition, the clear understanding of what those objectives are ironed out, then I think we'll be able to address all of this clearly. So I think that's pretty much of what I want to share for now. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. Okay, so thanks to all our speakers today. Very insightful sharing. I myself have learned a lot, and thanks for the support that you have shown to the campaign that IDEAS has done, and we hope to continue this conversations going forward. Okay, so we are running out of time, but I do need to do one last thing, which is my colleague will share the feedback form for this session in the chat box. Now you can share it, and I will give some time, maybe about 3 to 4 minutes for you to fill it in before I end this webinar. Yeah, so please share the link. Okay, there you go. All right. So I will leave you to it. And I will end the webinar in 3 minutes time. All right. So thank you everyone once again for joining us in this afternoon's webinar. Thanks to all our 3 speakers, His Excellency for gracing us with your kind words for IDEAS, and also the valuable insights that you have provided. And to everyone tuning in, don't forget to download the Tanpa Perkauman Handbook, share it with your family and friends, and we really hope that it can serve as a guide and a tool for us to have healthier conversations about race relations in Malaysia. And thanks to all our project partners that we have worked so closely with in the past 2 years. And we hope to continue these collaborations in the future. And I hope all of you have filled in the feedback form, and we look forward to having all of you in our next event. So thank you very much once again, everyone. I will just end the webinar now. Assalamualaikum and good evening. Thank you.